Hello and welcome to this new fast speed Blender tutorial in which we are going to model and rig an ant. We have two reference images downloaded from Pixabay, from which the other one is a top view and the other one is from the side. We are using the beta version of Blender 2.82 for this project. Let's start by bringing in the reference images. Hit Shift, A, and choose Image, Reference. In this case we will disable the Align to View feature since we are not in the top view at the moment. Let's also make the image only show in the orthographic mode so that it will not be visible when we are moving around the scene in the perspective mode. Now let's switch to the front view by pressing numpad 1, and then we can hit Shift, A, to bring in the other reference image. This time we can check Align to View because we are already in the correct view in the 3D viewport. Let's uncheck Display Perspective from this image as well. We can now toggle between these two references with numpad 7 and numpad 1. Please note that these images are not from the same ant, and their poses are also different. So we are going to have to make some artistic decisions on which image to follow. Now let's create some additional views so that we can see our model from several directions while modeling. Simply right-click on the edge between two panels and choose either vertical or horizontal split. Then we can hit numpad 1 for the new window, to switch it to the front view. Let's make one more split and set it to a diagonal view of the model. Now let's start modeling by bringing the default cube into edit mode with tab. Next we'll set up the mirror modifier. For that we should move our start mesh fully to one side of the mirror axis. So let's hit G for grab, Y for the Y axis, number 1 to move exactly one Blender unit, minus to move it in the opposite direction, and finally enter to confirm. It would have been good to delete the face that is parallel to the X axis, but I forgot to do so and will do it later in the video. Now let's go to the modifiers panel and add the mirror modifier. By default the mirroring is done against the X-axis, but we will need to change that to the Y-axis. Now we can see how the mirror modifier is duplicating everything for us on the other side of the model. Great, this will make our modeling 2 times easier. I recommend turning on clipping for the modifier, so that Blender won't let you cross the mirror boundary with your mesh, which could create potential problems for your model. Now let's start shaping our cube by grabbing it with the G key and scaling it with the S key. Let's first create the basic shape of the rear end. The diagonal view makes selecting various parts of our mesh easy. Let's select the face that points towards the rest of the ant body and move it with G. Let's round out the shape with a subsurf modifier. Note that the order of the modifiers in the stack matters. In our case we'll perform the subsurf operation after the mirror operation, so we'll have the subsurf below the mirror modifier. Now let's work on the mesh and pay attention to both of our reference images. The reference image is at the moment hiding a part of the mesh, so let's select the image and set it to the back of everything. We need to divide our cube mesh so that we can model it more accurately. Loop cuts are a handy way of doing that. There is a tool here that you could use, but the fastest way is probably to just hit Ctrl R, and then bring your mouse over the edge that you wanted to cut. After the preview shows the cut in the desired direction, you can spin your mouse wheel to add more cuts if needed, and accept the cuts by left-clicking. Blender then puts you into edge slide mode in which you can slide the new cuts into the exact location you want. Now we can scale this part of the model up by hitting the S key. We'll keep adding cuts and moving things around until the shape resembles the reference images. Let's speed this part of the video up a little so you don't get bored. When the shape of the rear end is looking decent, we can move to create the next bits. Let's select this face here, and extrude it with E. Again we will simply add some loop cuts, scale them to reshape the mesh and thus work our way through the ant body. Let's speed this part up until we have something new to show. Remember to save your file regularly. When we set our model to have smooth shading in object mode, we can see a shading problem in the middle of the ant. This is because we forgot to delete the face in the middle when we started modeling. Let's fix it now by going back to edit mode and temporarily disabling the mirror modifier. Then we can select one of the problematic faces and use the Select Linked Flat Faces command to select the other ones as well. Finally, let's delete them by hitting X, and choosing Faces. Now the shading looks good. Let's next start working on the legs. We want to create round holes in the mesh for them, and round holes require a minimum of 8 vertices. So let's apply our subsurf modifier in order to have a more detailed mesh to work with. Now we can go to Edit Mode and select 4 faces next to each other where the first leg should start. If we delete these faces, we will get a hole that has 8 vertices. Let's Alt-click to select this edge loop, and round it out a bit with the To-Sphere tool. After we are happy with the roundness, let's snap the 3D cursor to the center of this loop by hitting Shift, S, and selecting Cursor to Selected. Now let's switch to the top view, and disable the mirror modifier temporarily, in order to add new meshes more easily. Next we'll add a cylinder mesh by hitting Shift, A. We'll drop the amount of vertices to 8, since that will match the hole in our mesh nicely. We can also tweak the radius and the rotation of the mesh. Let's also shorten the depth of the cylinder. Finally, we can re-enable the mirror modifier and place the cylinder next to the hole we created earlier. We could have deleted the end caps while creating the cylinder mesh, but since I forgot, I will simply delete these faces now by shift-selecting them and hitting X. Next we can manipulate the cylinder to make it match the hole as closely as possible. Here I'm hitting R 2 times in order to rotate the object with trackball rotation instead of regular rotation. After we have a decent match, we can Alt-click to select first one of the edge loops and then Shift-Alt-click to select the opposite loop. Now let's open the operator search, and search for the Bridge Edge Loops command, in order to combine the two parts. Next we can shape the legs by moving, rotating, scaling and extruding edges until we have a decent leg shape. Note that we won't bend the legs on the Z-axis in order to make the rigging process easier. When we have the rig in place, it will be easy to pose the legs correctly. It's usually a good idea to add some extra edge loops around the joints, in order for the legs to bend more nicely. After the first leg is ready, let's select it with some selection tools and then duplicate it with Shift-D, so that we can make it the basis for the other legs as well. Rotating the leg creates a problem with the mirror modifier, so let's once again switch it temporarily off first. Now we'll basically just repeat the process of attaching the legs to the body, so let's speed the video up again. After the legs are done, let's add some antennas too. The process is quite similar to the legs, so we will move quickly. If we want to retain a fully quad-based mesh, we can add some grid fills for the end caps of the cylinders. Next we can create the jaws by extruding some faces and tweaking their shape. For the eye sockets we can extrude 4 faces inwards and round the holes out a bit. Then we'll snap the cursor to the center of the sockets and add a cube mesh, which we will then subdivide with the smoothness set to 1, in order to round it out while subdividing. Let's add a few more tweaks to the shapes and then we'll call the modeling phase ready. In the next tutorial we will rig, shade and render the ant. Stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching and see you next time at fastertutorials.com.